Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Louis, for that very gracious introduction. And a bigger thank you to our hosts, the Governance Academy, for inviting me back to Estonia. It's always great to be back here. And for organizing this conference today on what is probably a very timely and a very important topic, the digital transformation of governments. Now, I can't also think of a better venue than Tallinn to talk about this topic. The smart society of the future doesn't look like science fiction because you are in one of the smart societies of the future. And truth is, it looks a bit like King's Landing for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans. If you've not been to Old Town Tallinn, in Old Town very close by, I strongly recommend that you do. It is redolent of King's Landing. So now think about the smart society of the future. It is a bit like Westeros, but run by an elected paperless cabinet. So a quick word about who we are and what we do. I represent the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. We were the first graduate-only school of global affairs in the United States, and arguably the best, and I'm biased about this. Now, the school started in the interwar years, a particularly difficult time in the world, and the mission statement hasn't changed, and I will read it out. It's maintaining the stability and prosperity of a complex, challenging, and an increasingly global society. Now, this mission statement was written, the vision was written in 1933, to be precise, but we would all agree that it is as relevant today, perhaps more relevant today, than it has ever been in the past. Now, we are a bit like our host nation, Estonia, when it comes to punching way above our weight on the global stage. We are a small school, but we'd like to think that we've had a pretty significant impact on the world till today. The other thing that we have in common with Estonia is that we've learned not just to survive, but also thrive in the shadow of much larger neighbors. In our case, Harvard and MIT, that are 2 train stops away from where we are. And so, a quick look at, and this is who, this is a quick snapshot of the impact that the school has had. It is really the alums of the school that have gone on to do great things on the global stage: international affairs, international business, global security, and so on and so forth. My favorite is, there are 2 favorites, actually. One is Lord Michael Dobbs, the creator of House of Cards, is a Fletcher alum. And we are extremely proud of your own Marina Kalyaran, who is a proud Fletcher alumna. So, again, a quick one about what we do. I represent the business center at the Fletcher School. Where I oversee research at our Institute for Business. I have the great privilege of, asking really big, hairy, audacious questions, and we have a lot of fun answering those questions. I mean, a few of them like, US, China, or Estonia, who leads the digital planet? And we'll talk about that today. And so the Institute is our hub and home for Digital Planet, which is an interdisciplinary research initiative dedicated to understanding the impact of digital innovation on the world and providing actionable insights for policymakers, decision makers in government and business. Now, when you invite an academic to talk, they like to talk about history. So I'm going to quickly talk about the brief history of our digital future. Now, it's a quaint little thing. I mean, the history of our future. Sorry, is that?
They're just making noise.
I'm sorry. All right. Now, there are many ways to kind of study history, and I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what what the brief history of our digital future has been. A good way to do it is to look at newspaper covers over time. Because they have, they tend to capture the zeitgeist, the intellectual, moral, cultural, economic, and political climate. So we went back a couple of decades to look at covers of The Economist to understand what the history of the digital era we live in has been. Now, that was the cover in 2000, 1 year before the dot-com bust. 1 year after Estonia declared itself to be a paperless cabinet. Fast forward to 2004, and a post-dot-com bust recovery, and there was a sophomore at Harvard who created an app, so to speak, in his dorm called Facebook. Many would argue that he should have finished his education. The world would have been a better place, but nonetheless. Fast forward to 2007. And now, this was the beginnings of the global financial crisis. Now, the West was grappling with a particularly difficult time, but the rest of the world was plugging in. Connectivity started going global. And then you fast forward to 2013, with all kinds of connectivity come all kinds of concerns about security, privacy, and trust. The speakers earlier in the day talked about it, and we will talk about it a little more later today. And then, we get to what they call planet of the phones. This is 2015, and we are pretty much, at the verge of universal connectivity. Technology, and I think it was the Assistant Secretary of the United Nations who spoke a little while ago, called it the pacing problem, right? Pacing problem being technology evolves much faster than society can build norms around it, and governments can build regulations around it. It's evolving much faster than we can civilize it, so to speak, and that is a challenge. So now we've kind of gone into the world of AI, and we are all talking about what will the world look like in the era of AI? What would jobs look like? Will we have jobs at all? Et cetera, et cetera. And those are all concerns. And we will talk about some of that. Now, which brings us to what would the world look like in 2030? What are the forces that are shaping our digital planet? I will talk about a few forces of demographics. Now, those are, that's the change in population all the way from 2018 to 2030 to 2050. And notice how some countries are moving. Come 2030, India would be the world's most populous nation with a population of a little over 1.5 billion. Will continue on to be the world's most populous nation, nudging 1.7 billion circa 2050. Now, Africa is where the world's youngest population will be. Nigeria, the median age today is 19.2. For most of Africa, the median age is going to be, in the late teens or well under 22. Now, and we also know that technology is driven, the use of technology is driven by the young ones. We all only adapt to it much later in our lives, but it's the young ones that drive technology. So when you think about where all these consumers are, they're primarily in or will be in parts of South and Southeast Asia and Africa. So why does that matter? It matters because of what Eric Schmidt said when he came to our campus a few years ago, and he said, it's a simple rule and it's easy to remember, give me 1 billion customers and I will find you a business model. Now, demographics drive consumption, demographics drive digital consumption, demographics drive all kinds of consumption, right? So that's where the consumers are. Now, the next set of forces are forces of security and privacy, and there was some talk about it a little while ago. That is a live attack map. It's a 20-second loop. It was taken sometime October 2016. At no point in time is this intended to demonstrate any interference in the American election. It is purely meant as an illustration. We do not comment on ongoing investigations. Now, that is the other side of the digital era that we live in. One more is, and this has also been talked about a little while ago, is that we are building, this digital era. In this digital era, we're building on very weak foundations, a bit like a rising Jenga tower. And it goes on. So I think it was Madam President who spoke a little while ago about the need for security. I'll move on to the next set of forces, institutional forces. Now, institutions, can't talk enough about them. They are probably the one most powerful force that will shape our digital present and our digital future. I will present 3 archetypes of institutions that are shaping and taking an active role in shaping our digital future. This is 2 countries. To the left is the world's most populous democracy. That's India and its digital identity, Aadhaar. It was Madam President who said a little while ago that digital identity is the greatest instrument of inclusion. To the right is one of the world's smallest democracies, Estonia, President Ilves handing out the e-residency card. Now, 2 very interesting, 2 extremely interesting initiatives by what is probably the world's smallest democracy and what is the world's largest democracy, ambitious, audacious attempt to create a more inclusive internet. Now, Estonia has taken, through its e-residency, it is looking out to the 6 billion plus people around the world and inviting them to all to be digital residents. India has tried to do that and has done a fairly decent job of giving people who hitherto had no means of identity a sense of identity in the digital era. So, two examples of one archetype of institutions fostering an inclusive internet. Now, let's talk about a second model, the social credit system in China. The way the social credit system works in China is that good deeds are rewarded. Good deeds, you mow your lawn, you take out your trash, you donate blood, et cetera, are rewarded. Bad deeds, you default on a loan, you cut somebody off on the street, you jaywalk, et cetera, are punished. And the scores get recalculated every month, and you are put in one of 8 buckets, from a AAA rating to a D rating, a AAA being the most trustworthy model citizen, and a D being nobody wants to touch you with a barge pole. So that is another form of institutions shaping our digital future. The third, and for this I'm going to dig back into about 2,000 years of history. For anybody who's been to Rome, you will see this on pretty much every manhole cover. It's SPQR, and my Latin is bad, but I will try it. It's Senatus Populusque Romanus, which means the Senate and people of Rome. Now, 2,000 years ago, a Roman citizen could walk across the face of the known world, free of fear of molestation. They could walk across the earth, where with little else but cloaked only in the protection of the word civis Romanus. I am a Roman citizen. Now, so great was the retribution of Rome, history books say, and it is universally understood to be certain that should any harm befall any Roman citizen, there would be some very fierce retribution. Now, that was the power and protection afforded by the state to its citizens in the Roman Empire. So SPQR. 2,000 years later, GDPR embodies the same philosophy of SPQR, probably the single most consequential regulatory development in information policy in a generation. Now, like civis Romanus, GDPR allows data subjects who are in the European Union the ability to walk across the face of the known digital planet free of the fear of molestation. Now, coincidentally, it was this week, last year, that GDPR came into force. So from SPQR to GDPR, another archetype of how institutions protect their people. The next set of forces are geopolitical forces. This is a headline from the Financial Times a few months ago. It talks about what is the AI arms race. And boy, the world loves creating a bipolar race of every kind. But my colleagues and I disagree. We don't think it is or will be a bipolar world. We think it will be a multipolar world. Now, why is this the era that we're entering into, and why is it even important? Now, data is the mother's milk for AI, right? So everything that we do, you sitting in the conference here, you watching a movie, you going for a run, et cetera, everything that you do, we create a digital trace, and that digital trace is valuable information to train machines, right? Now, so it is, so all the data that we consume creates more data, and that data is the mother's milk for AI. Now, the question is it really a US versus China? Now, my colleagues and I sat and looked at it, and we were like, if data is the new oil, or so the cliche goes, we'd like to think it's much more valuable than oil in the new economy that we're entering into. Where are the hotspots? So we wrote this article in the Harvard Business Review earlier this year, where we measured where are the greatest hotspots of data creation. So I will explain this. So what you see here on the x-axis is consumption, the aggregate consumption of data around the world. And on the y-axis is how accessible the data is, because accessibility allows for algorithms to train. And so when you think about, when you juxtapose it this way, you see the United States right up there, the EU not far behind, China growing, India. Now, accessibility of data in China and India is very low, whereas in the United States and EU, it's pretty high. So what would the world look like in an AI era? Time will tell. But the way we see it, it is going to be at least a multipolar world. That brings us to the next question. So we are in the digital era, and where in the world is the digital economy moving the fastest? And this was a question that my colleagues and I asked ourselves way back late 2012, early 2013, and it took us into all kinds of interesting directions. And we said, let's find a way of measuring the digital competitiveness of the world. So we created something called the Digital Evolution Index. Now, the Digital Evolution Index, we look at 4 core components. We look at demand factors in a country, supply conditions, institutional environment, and innovation and change that is happening. And we plotted it. We took about, in the first round, we went all the way back to 2008. 2008 was a great year to start because the world hit a reset. And like we saw a little while ago, the West was, trying to get back on its feet, and the rest were rising. It was a great time to kind of take as a start point. So we started collecting data. In the first round, we did this on about 50 countries. The second round in 60, and we're going to be updating this in 2020, this time next year. And we are hopefully looking at adding more countries. And we have on the x-axis, we look at about 108 data points taken together, measured over 10 years. So this, on the x-axis, is momentum, and on the y-axis is where you are, your state. So think of your x-axis as the rate of evolution, and the and the y-axis as the state. How advanced are you, and how fast are you moving? That is the map of the world. What you see is you can break the world out into 4 interesting quadrants. Countries that are slowing down, as does come with age, and some countries on either side of the Atlantic are here. Some countries are in what we call the watch-out zone. Lots of challenges both in the absolute state of evolution and momentum, hobbled by primarily institutional and infrastructural issues. Then there's a set of very interesting countries that are in the breakout zone. High momentum, still a lot of headroom for growth, but very high momentum. And some of the most populous countries are in the breakout zones. So think Bangladesh, think India, think Indonesia, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Nigeria. So this is the exciting zone. And why is this the exciting zone? Like Eric Schmidt told us a little while ago, find me 1 billion customers and I will find you a business model. Now, what's even more exciting is the standout zone. These are a set of countries that are not just demonstrating very high momentum over time, but also have a very advanced, digital state. And are you surprised that we have Estonia right here? So internally, we call Estonia the Goldilocks digital nation. It's the third rock from the sun, does extremely well, along with its peers. So we started looking for ways in which we can get to what the Madam President said a little while ago. How can countries, leapfrog Estonia? Now, but to leapfrog Estonia, you need to first be able to get to Estonia. Now, you've all gotten to Estonia. The next stage is to get your countries to Estonia, and then hopefully surpass Estonia. So we looked at Estonia, and we said, okay, you know what? Let's take 3 case studies. 3 very populous nations. We talked about them. 1 from each continent: Mexico in the Americas, Nigeria in Africa, and India. 3 high momentum, countries, peers in many aspects. And we said, what would it take for these countries to reach Estonia? And as we started looking at, what makes a country a smart nation, we discovered a very interesting group of countries that Estonia managed to build a network with. They're called the D5 nations. They started a club in 2014. This is Estonia, Israel, the UK, New Zealand, and South Korea, most of who are in the standout zone. South Korea a little slow, but nonetheless. And so we looked at them and said, look, and these governments got together and said, we will build a network where we will learn from each other and nudge each other to build our digital societies, where we will use best available technologies to improve our governments, improve our public services, and so on and so forth. So it's a great club to belong to. Subsequently, over the years, they expanded the club to include the likes of Canada, Portugal, Uruguay, Mexico, and come October in Uruguay at the summit, they would now become D10 with the inclusion of Denmark. So we looked at them and we said, look, that's a great group of countries to create a benchmark with and understand what is it that they're doing and what is it that the rest of the world can learn from them. Pretty much, we are doing on the research side, on the data side, what you're all here doing, face to face. So that's our question. So inspired by Francis Fukuyama's Getting to Denmark, where he used the term Denmark, as a metaphor for democratic development, strong societies, strong institutions, strong economies, et cetera, we took liberties with his, with his quote, and we called it Getting to Estonia because to us, Estonia is trying to do exactly what Denmark is doing, but by using digital technologies. And along with Estonia, its peers who are a part of the D5, now D9, very soon D10 network. So we said, look, let's go to this network. Let's understand what they do. And let's measure what they do first. And so that was the start of our study on smart societies. So we went around trying to create a definition of what a smart society is. And this is the definition we came up with. And you can read it faster than I can off the screen. And I'll take a little water break while you all read it. Now, so three core things, and what a great way to do to improve on three very big, all too important outcomes: well-being of people, robustness of an economy, and efficient institutions. And that's what pretty much every government, every elected government, surely every policymaker ought to be thinking of if they're not already. So we said, let's go build this. So we went around first talking to this network and also collecting data. So we collected in excess of about 200 data points across 12 dimensions sitting within these three outcome areas: people, well-being of people, robustness of the economy, and effectiveness of institutions. Under the people dimension, we broke it down into four core components, if you will: environment and quality of life, inclusivity of all kinds, labor market inclusion, economic mobility, diversity and acceptance, diversity of and acceptance of all kinds of people that don't look like us, that don't pray like us, that don't eat like us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And inclusive policies of governments, state of talent in the human condition, talent development. So these measures, form our people sort of outcome. The next one is the economy, and within which there are, again, four components: global connectedness, economic robustness, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And we measure all kinds of things again in this. Mobility of data. Do you have the right kind of policies to facilitate free flows of data? Do you have strong policies that are effective for mobility of goods and services? Mobility of financial flows, economic productivity, funding for new businesses. How is the entrepreneurship environment in a country? How is innovation? What is the state of innovation readiness in a country, and so on and so forth. Sorry. The last one is institutions. I'm sorry about the spacing. I tried to fix it late last night. Didn't work. And again, in institutions, four core components: freedoms, trust, safety and security, and public services. The four things that we expect our institutions to provide to us. The four things that, again, the Roman Republic provided to its citizens 2,000 years ago. The same things that we would like to, or we all must strive to provide to our citizens in the digital era: freedoms, trust, safety and security, public services. So all of these put together became what we call the Smart Society's benchmark. It has 12 dimensions, again, all the way from economy, institutions, and people. And what we did is we went to the founding five of the D5. We took their best attributes: Estonia, Israel, UK, Korea, New Zealand. We took their best attributes across these 242 dimensions and indicators, and we created a mythical benchmark. Now think of a mythical country which has all the best attributes of all these countries. Now some countries achieved it, which means it's achievable. Yet, no one country has all the best attributes, which means it's aspirational. So we tried to create an aspirational yet achievable benchmark. And that's the outer benchmark, which, when we're in the Nordics, we call it D5landia, and when we're in Asia, we call it D5istan. So that mythical country, now when we mapped, and what we then did is we said, look, let's take the best 5 countries that are banded together anyways, to create and use best available technologies to improve on these outcomes. Let's see where they stand against this aspirational benchmark themselves, right? I mean, sure, we're all here to talk about how Estonia is a great smart society, but let's see how Estonia does compared to its own peers first, because they have a ways to go too. Turns out they do. So that is a bit of a complex picture, but I can break it down. What you see is the footprints of 5 countries: Estonia, Israel, New Zealand, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. The green border is Estonia. Blue is Israel. Purple is United Kingdom, arguably one of the strongest. And black is New Zealand. They all have strengths in very different areas. And it turns out even Estonia has a ways to go in closing gaps. So that And then we took this model and we said, now it's ready to, to benchmark other countries against Estonia. The very thing that you all are here to, to quote to quote Madam President again, to hopefully get to Estonia and someday surpass Estonia. So we said we will go to other countries. Now, that's where we are. We are in the process of going to other countries and trying to understand where they are compared to this benchmark. So this was Estonia's footprint in 2013. And we did this over time to see how footprints change. This was Estonia in 2013. That's Estonia in 2017. For people taking pictures, I'll just roll back once again in case you didn't get it. By the way, the deck will be uploaded and available for everyone to download on a later date. And when you juxtapose the two, you see how they have made improvements. So the lighter green is 2013 Estonia. The darker green is 2017 Estonia. And you can see they've been bulking up in a few areas. They've improved their safety and security. They've improved their trust. Their public services are pretty top class. And they've improved their global connectedness. They've improved their entrepreneurship, not surprisingly. And their freedoms are pushing the envelope. Incidentally, and also to speak to something that the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations mentioned a little while ago, SDGs. So the Smart Societies model accounts for about 2/3 of the SDG goals. So any country that does well on these dimensions is also effectively taking care of about 2/3 of the SDGs. 11 out of 17 goals are captured in our Smart Societies model. So you do this, you're about 2/3 of the way in. So now it's quiz time, because I'm an academic and I get to give you a quiz. So pull out your phones, all of you, and if you tap next to the current session that's going on, there is a question there. And the question is, if we were to benchmark 3 countries, Mexico, India, and Nigeria, the ones that I showed you a little while ago, which of these 3, the first question, not the second one, please. Which of these 3 countries is closest to getting to Estonia? In some sense, which of these 3 will someday surpass or leapfrog Estonia? Ladies and gentlemen, place your bets. We'll see the results on the screen once everybody is done. We'll give you all a minute. All right, so we got the answers. 41, all right, 42 among us friends. 44.8. Nearly 1/2 of this room thinks it'll be India. About 26, wait, the dial's moving. It's happening real time, people. The dials are not in my hands. You are in control of this dial. So about 1/3 of you think, about 30% think it's Nigeria. Did I tell you all Mexico is a part of the Digital 9, soon to be Digital 10? Are you sure? You want to change your answers? The time is now. I'm not plumping for Mexico here, but just saying. All right. I'm sure the dials are going to change. Looks like we, Nigeria lost some, Mexico won some. All right, no. All right, we'll lock that down. We'll lock this one down. So looks like looks like still, about 40% of you think it'll be India for some reason. I don't know why. But the answer is, like they tell you in every school, it depends. The answer that was a trick question. It depends. And so what we'll do now is, so we went ahead and benchmarked these three countries against those outcome areas to see where they are and what is it that they've done. That's Mexico. So the red line that you see is Mexico's footprint. The green is Estonia circa 2017, right? Take a minute, soak it in. So clearly, it looks like there's a reason why Mexico is a part of the D9. They do do well on measures of environment and quality of life. Although that's a survey, and this is where things get interesting. People in Mexico are happy with their environment, but Mexico also has a lot of pollution issues, especially Mexico City last week. And my colleague was in Mexico giving a talk, and he could barely breathe. So, but people are generally happy. So there seems to be something about how they feel out here. But clearly, state of talent is where they've been doing well. The other area is their global connectedness. So there are some areas of strength. So we broke it down further, and we said, let's look at where their strengths and weaknesses are across the three dimensions. Now, the upper bar that you see is the D5 benchmark, and these are, the three countries. The lighter orange is India, deeper orange is Mexico, and the green is Nigeria. And so you can see where their areas of strengths and weaknesses are on the people front. Clearly, they seem to be doing well on satisfaction measures, but they are also losing talent. So they ought to be doing a better job at retaining talent. And there seems to be something going on with their levels of inclusivity, worth looking into. On the economy front, it has very strong flows of goods, services, and data. NAFTA's done well. We'll see where that goes. But it needs to improve its entrepreneurial ecosystems. Its entrepreneurial ecosystems seem weak, and that's where, and especially when we talk about the digital economy, taking the example of Estonia again, it is really your people, your talent, that will make all the difference in the global digital economy, and they seem to be underinvesting in that. That is worth investigating. The last is institutions. The government readily does adopt digital technologies, but definitely needs to improve its freedoms and safety, turns out. And interestingly, not a very trusting lot of the government. Are we surprised they had a change, a pretty radical change, if you will, of administration recently? Now, then we went to India. Another interesting story. That's India's footprint compared to Estonia's. They seem to be doing extremely well on measures of trust and talent development. The state of talent is pretty strong, and not surprisingly. And so the way we've collected this data also is not just from public sources. Where public sources aren't sufficient, we've actively sought data from proprietary data entities, companies that operate in the digital economy around the world, and they share their data, and we're grateful to them for doing it. Anonymized, de-identified data, and we combine all of that along with other, subscription data sets. So it's a massive exercise, and where there is no data available. For example, there are some areas, and I know there are folks from VFS here, and I'd love to chat about this with them later. There is absolutely no measure out there on how long. For example, you probably saw a booth out there which says startup visas come to Estonia. There's absolutely no measure out there that compares countries on their visa procedures. How long will you get a visa for, et cetera, et cetera. how many times do you have to renew it? It's all of that is effort time on anybody that you're trying to attract. We put elbow grease against that. We literally scoured through websites, and some of those websites are notoriously bad, but we managed to get a picture of countries and what their procedures are for attracting talent. So a lot of work that went into, went into creating these 200 plus data points. So that's India. Strengths and weaknesses, again, on the people dimension. It has, not surprisingly, a very highly skilled labor force, but its health and well-being measures can do better. Sorry, that wasn't me. Right. Now, when you look at the economy, India benefits tremendously from a strong entrepreneurial ecosystem, especially in the last 5 years, but has some serious infrastructural problems. Data speeds and mobility are a problem. Now, this was right before that 800-pound gorilla called Reliance started giving away free broadband, pretty much free, to 300 million people in India. So I'm assuming that the next time we do this, things would slightly change. But still those challenges of supply and last mile connectivity issues remain. Now, last one is institutions. Now, the Indian government has been embracing digital technologies pretty strongly, but they have a long distance to go in turning them into delivery of public services. So that's the story of India. Now let's go to the third case study, which is Nigeria. This is Nigeria's footprint. I'm going to race through this very quickly. Areas of strengths and weaknesses. Again, Nigeria needs to do a much better job at improving skills and quality of life aspects in order to take real advantage of its demographic dividend. Now, on the economy side, Nigeria's entrepreneurial ecosystem particularly suffers. It's not even a blip on entrepreneurship, and that's a problem. That's a problem when one of the biggest economies, and the most populous nations in Africa is struggling to create entrepreneurs, especially when there is a high degree of unemployment in the region. That's a problem. Needs special focus. Now, on institutions, again, Nigeria surprisingly enjoys tremendous, freedoms. It's even if you were to compare that to Mexico and India, it is surprisingly strong, and trust is quite high too. So there are some things going for Nigeria there. Now, public services are a problem. Government use of digital almost, I don't want to say non-existent, but can do better. So that's where the three countries fall. Now I get to give you another quiz. If you could kindly open your phones once again, and this is a self-assessment, very quick. Now that you've been exposed to the model, the question for you is pick 5 of the areas for your own country and identify where you think you might have the greatest gaps in getting to Estonia. Where are your biggest gaps? Now, feel free to add, I don't know if there's a possibility to add the name of your country. It's optional. What we will do is, again, anonymize this and then share it ideally now, and also share it again in the afternoon when Linner and I have a panel, and we will talk about this in greater detail. So take a minute. There are about 12 dimensions there, 4 in people, 4 in economy, and 4 in institutions. And if you could pick any 5 where you think your country, might have the greatest gaps in getting to and eventually, hopefully, leapfrogging Estonia. All done? All right. My turn to look at the stage here. So, public services. The dial's moving as we speak. We'll keep this quiz on for a while. So if you want to change your minds, you can. And we will pick this up again at 4 o'clock. But if you were to take a snapshot of the now, it looks like public services followed by innovation and entrepreneurship, safety and security, and trust. Not in that order. Sorry, I missed trust. It's a low talent development too. So all right. So those seem to be the zones. What we'll do in the afternoon is break them down again into their core outcome areas. You know, how many of you feel like there are gaps on the people dimension, on the economy dimension, and on the institutions dimension? And we'll take an assessment on that. So, thank you. I hope this has been worthwhile. I will quickly close with, can you cut back to my slides, please? Thank you. So, I'll close with one of my favorite philosophers, Søren Kierkegaard, who I have taken the liberty of updating his quote for the digital era. Life on the digital planet can only be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards. Thank you very much for sharing your time with me today.
Thank you, Ravi. We have a little bit of time left. Trust was number 2. I'm going from sort of paraphrasing some of the questions that we had here. Trust was number 2 already in this room. I was interested that when you transposed every country's graph together, there was United Kingdom and a few countries where Estonia was lower in trust than a whole bunch of those countries in that collection of 5, which I thought was very interesting because I thought Estonia has a high level of trust. And I always attributed that to low population size, that they were used to a small and connected society and they were used to trusting one another. To me, that felt like an obvious idea. But then we had these other very large countries that also expressed trust in their governments. So the question is, how does a large country end up with a large trust in their government? And what practically can countries do to improve this intangible quality of trust?
That's a good question, Louis. It's so first off, most trust measures, and by the way, we also study the state of digital trust around the world. I'm happy to share that, and we'll probably upload our report we studied about 42 countries, and we looked at 2 things when it comes to trust. Trust is really the exchange that happens in the digital sense. It is an interchange or an interaction really between the givers and the guarantors of trust, right? The trustees and the trustors. We, all of us, the consumers, are the givers of trust. And what do we bring to the table? We bring our attitudes and our behaviors. So the stuff that we say and the stuff that we do is what we bring to the table. What do the guarantors bring? They bring the experience and the environment. And it is this confluence that creates digital trust. Now, the thing with most trust measures, excepting when it is recorded behavior of what you do when nobody is watching or when people are watching, is what you say. And so the trouble with most of these trust measures are they're drawn from surveys. And surveys people are not always very honest, and it is probably their state of mind, and especially in a place like Estonia.
Extremely subjective sort of measure for people.
And that too. And especially in Estonia, where people are used to a very high standard, your expectations are pretty high. So if I have to wait for 6 minutes to file my taxes, it's a problem in Estonia.
Oh, bro, if I have to sign a bit of paper, I am agitated. Okay?
Right.
I want to sign something, no paper.
Right, and for somebody who lives in the United States, it takes me 2 full days that I don't get paid for to file my taxes. So if it takes 6 minutes, it's a problem in Estonia. So, it gets a bit subjective, if you know what I mean.
Very interesting. I'm trying to move around. A lot of people were talking about how to grow and many of the qualities. I want to focus on one question down the bottom. If you emphasize global connectedness and economic robustness in Smart City Benchmark, is there inherently smaller, isolated countries will they just inherently always lag behind? So small Estonia, sure, small country, small population, but we're on the edge of Europe. We got a lot of people right next door. What if you're a small Pacific nation out in the middle of the water there? You know, does that affect things? How does that change some of that?
So we did look at a small Pacific nation. We looked at New Zealand, and they punch way above their weight. They do extremely well. Look, the thing with connectedness is, and we're looking at connectedness across a variety of measures, right? We're looking at the free movement of capital, goods and services, and data, right? The 5 freedoms, if you will, of the European Union, in other words. So when you look at those things, it really doesn't matter what the size of your country is. What the measures literally look at how much you're plugged into the global economy. And because they're all normalized, it makes it easy for us to compare a giant country like China with a tiny country like Estonia and still not let size dictate, your where you are on the map.
Okay, fair enough. All right, unfortunately, we need to leave it there. We're running out of time. We need to get to the lunch break. So please, one more round of applause for Ravi. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.